Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and once again, for the second week in a row, you're stuck with me and Archie. Can you believe it? No guest on again this week. There was a bonus episode last week, though, with Indy Next driver Max Taylor, so do give a listen to that at some point if you haven't already. It's only about 25 minutes long, so it's definitely worth a listen. But we are now fully in the depths of off-season, as we'll get onto in Archie's countdown rides at the end. We are actually now closer to St. Pete 26 than we are to Nashville 2025. So we're looking forward now rather than looking back. Can you believe that? That's quite cool. It's weird to say our season's fed by that. I feel like that's quite a significant marker now.
That's mad. I actually didn't consider that. Like, we've got the dates through for IndyCar Content Day, which always feels like a kind of big milestone in the off season. So they are falling last week of January. So a bit more reasonable actually than kind of the early mid-January of recent years, which feels like quite a distance before the season starts. But this time it's with around a month to go, which is quite good, I think. But yeah, that's a big marker passed, and yeah, that's crazy to think about actually. That now into December, into the Christmas months, and then once the Christmas period is kind of over, that's when you kind of really start going from reviewing to previewing.
Well, that's it. And last week we did a bit of a news catch-up because we had so many guests on, as we mentioned, that we had an opportunity to catch up with a lot of the news, and that's the way to make the off-season speed. Where I have guests week on week on week, and hopefully we'll have some more in the coming weeks and months. And as you probably gathered by the pre-intro and us not discussing it for the rest of the episode, we had Mick Schumacher announced at Robb and Racing probably a couple of hours. No, it was before it came out, wasn't it? So it was after we recorded it, but before it released. So that was annoying. We will recap that news shortly to discuss it. So yeah, that was a bit, it always happens, isn't it? Nothing happens for weeks, and then an announcement literally happens in the one day between us recording it and us releasing it.
Yeah, it was the one time we tried to be ahead of the game and record on a Sunday evening, and lo and behold, Monday comes around and they announce Mick, and yeah, I think we decided we just didn't want to tear up the entire podcast and to include that. So gives us something to talk about this week as well.
Yeah, so we got that news. We also have some further news at Juncos, which did come out today. We're recording this a day later than we usually do because me and Archie had chaotic Monday evening. So actually, it's playing to our favour this week. So good job we delayed it one day this week, Archie. And what we're doing for the rest of the episode, because that won't take up the full hour, is we reached out to some of you this week on Reddit and various different social media platforms to see if you had any questions for us. So we're going to answer some of the questions you have for us, mostly IndyCar related. And that should hopefully be a fun little episode. As I said, now, as you say, definitely looking at the preview stage. Once we get to the new year, now it's officially preview stage rather than review stage. And eagle-eyed viewers on YouTube, maybe Spotify, I'm rocking some Kiffin Simpson merch this week. IndyCars had their end of season sale, which means everything is ridiculously cheap. And the shipping costs are quite expensive. So me and Archie and our good friend James Scott did a bulk order to save on shipping costs. But over the next weeks and months in the off season, you might see us sporting some fancy new IndyCar merchandise. But I didn't have loads, so it's quite cool to get my stock replenished. So I've got some cool little items, I think, this time. Again, last year was a bit underwhelming for the end of the season sale. This year they kind of went fully back with a bang, so there's a lot.
Yeah, this is one of the issues with UK fans at the moment, because the series isn't really big enough over here. There's not really much merchandise accessible, so you have to wait for this period where it actually becomes worth it to spend the money on the shipping costs, which kind of is offset by all of the reductions in prices of stuff. So yeah, I've ended up with like 7 new caps and 10 new t-shirts and goodness knows what, because it's our only opportunity.
This is 2 years of good, because last year wasn't low, so we've had a lot of catching up to do. So this year represented a very, very good opportunity to do so. So you'll see bits and bobs of merchandise throughout the coming weeks, which is always nice. Nice way to do our season. So fair play IndyCar store. End of the season, get rid of stuff before Black Friday. Excellent. Anyway, let's move on to what we're going to talk about this week, and we're going to start right off at Robb and Racing, who, as you said, announced Mick Schumacher to drive the number 47 last week alongside Graham Rahal and Louis Foster, and he's going to enter his first full season of IndyCar after 2 seasons in the World Endurance Championship and 2 seasons of Formula One. And obviously a very, very high profile name, and obviously son of 7-time Formula One world champion Michael. Did a test last month on the Indianapolis road course with the team, so he's already familiar with how they work. Archie spoke to him at the time, and he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to commit to at that point. He's leaving his options open. But about a month later, we've had the confirmation that he's going to be racing full-time in IndyCar as of 2026.
It's extremely exciting news. I mean, I would say one of the biggest driving moves we've had in some time in terms of the kind of pedigree of name. I know obviously we've had the whole Kyle Larson story, but in terms of a full-time move, kind of feels a bit like when Grosjean came over, obviously, after his rather dramatic end to his own F1 career. But yeah, I mean, selfishly, this is a really significant development for IndyCar in terms of the exposure that this will bring. But I think for Mick Schumacher himself, this is a chance to write a new chapter in his own racing story, because there were glimmers of promise in F1, and that was in a tough situation, especially his rookie season. That was a Haas car that wasn't really upgraded at all. And then, yeah, a bit of a baptism of fire. He was, had a rookie teammate as well. And all of that ended abruptly then after his second season, unfortunately, where I feel like he did make some steps forward. But yeah, went to WEC, was very highly rated by all accounts, but he really gave a clear impression. I guess when he did the test at IMS with RLL, that he really wanted to return to single-seater racing. And I mean, he was in discussions, he said, with Cadillac until pretty late on. They ended up obviously going in a different direction. Schumacher is not closing that F1 door yet. He doesn't believe IndyCar necessarily shuts that, but he also made sure to insist when we spoke to him in a media call last week that he does see IndyCar as a long-term play for his career, and he's all in. I mean, he's committed to just running IndyCar. I know he was asked about IMSA and said that nope, he's not doing that for now. He really just wants to do the full season of IndyCar, which I guess was a question some people had, obviously, with the oval factor and this perception from the F1 European world that oval racing is particularly dangerous. And I think Schumacher gave some pretty enlightening insights on ovals, saying that he spoke to loads of different people about kind of the pros and cons. But yeah, ultimately wasn't put off by it, sees it as worth the risk. He finds IndyCar from his early impressions pretty fun. He enjoyed driving the car. And yeah, he's got a big test program coming up in terms of particularly helping him grow accustomed to the ovals. But of course, it's a new car and doesn't know any of the tracks or anything of that sort. But I see this as a particularly good collaboration. I mean, it seems like both sides of the party were kind of impressed by one another pretty significantly after the test. I think RLL were particularly desperate to impress Schumacher, obviously kind of giving him that 4-day, kind of embedding him within the team to kind of give him that kind of taste of almost what a race week of preparation would be like. And yeah, Schumacher indeed was impressed, and the team immediately thought the same about him. And of course, this year is going to be a learning curve with so much unfamiliarity, but it's going to be a heck of a story, I think, for us to follow and to cover. And yeah, he's really buying into IndyCar and the environment, and brilliant news all in all.
Yeah, it is a very significant move, and it's somebody who's only going to garner more European attention and more rise into the sport. Schumacher is always a very popular guy. I mean, I know this isn't the greatest metric of performances, but every time we talk about Mick Schumacher on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram, he's always one who gets a lot of engagement still. He's one who's very popular. A lot of people see him as a guy who didn't get his fair chance in Formula One. I'm not going to have that discussion here. But he's getting another single-seater opportunity, and this really is, we're going to always say it is the next best single-seater opportunity there is after Formula One. And he does keep that corridor open. I mean, now more than ever, well, not never, but more than recent years, we are having discussions about IndyCar drivers having a home potentially in Formula One with Carlton Herta, and I'm sure Alex Palou, if you wanted it, could very well be welcome in a Formula One environment. And that's an opportunity there for Mick Schumacher. And it's a quite exciting move for RLL as a team as well. I think we've always tended to have two pretty strong drivers, then a third entry, which has been a little bit weaker, whether that was Devon Di Francesco, Pietro Fittipaldi, Jack Carvey. We've always, last couple of years, we've just had a driver who doesn't seem as up to speed as the other ones. Now, Schumacher's going to be an interesting one. He's a lot more proven. I feel like generally in motorsport, he's always going to have it a little bit difficult because of who his father is, and it kind of feels like he needs to escape his father's shadow a little bit and make his own career. And it's going to be a great opportunity for him to do that. He's got two teammates who are shown to be quick guys, but maybe haven't had the results to show for it. Graham Rahal is obviously greatly experienced. Louis Foster has got a bit more experience on the European side and the American side as well. And could pose a good test to Schumacher. Obviously, a similar level of experience when it comes to the US racing. In general, just single-seater racing as well, to be honest with you. So that's going to be intriguing, having a lineup where all three guys are pretty competitive and should be able to bounce off each other. I mean, Rahal and Foster are pretty close. I think Schumacher could be in the mix too, whilst Di Francesco at points was kind of struggling a little bit at times last year. So obviously, I really like the move, bringing over more European eyes. It's a bit of a statement of intent from RLL, as we've been discussing a lot this off-season with some of the personnel they brought into the team. And obviously, when we spoke to Louis a couple of weeks ago, he was pretty confident about the team's chances heading into next season. So, as you say, overall, is going to be the big challenge. He's got a lot to learn, but Romain Grosjean seemed to learn most of it pretty quickly. And the adaptation to ovals, I think sometimes people see it as a little bit more extreme than it actually is. A lot of people get used to it very, very quickly, especially somebody with Schumacher's general motorsport experience, who's driven a lot of different cars and adapted to a lot of different things. And obviously, it's a completely new calendar, loads of new circuits, but I'm sure he is going to be very capable.
So if you want to read a little bit more about this move, I have a pretty in-depth feature that went up on the DIVEBOMB site last week, kind of just looking inside the move, how it came about, and a lot of Schumacher's thoughts. And also, we will now play in a clip as well of what Mick had to say to us in last week's media call on the process of kind of making the decision after the test to move to IndyCar, plus all of the insights he gave on how he weighed up kind of the perceived danger factor of the series, particularly ovals. And also Jay Fry, who was pretty instrumental to this move for Schumacher, speaks on the state of the team and the test plan he has in place for Mick. Hi, Mick. In the week since the test, what has the decision-making process kind of been for you to determine that this was the right option for your future? I guess, what was on the table for you for next year, and how did you come to this eventual decision of IndyCar?
Well, I think that ultimately for me it was just interesting to exploit that single-seater route again and kind of be more settled in it. Obviously, I think to me then IndyCar was the best option. I just had to kind of confirm it to me and to everybody around me that this is something that I can see myself doing for the long term. And therefore, yeah, I think that the decision-making process was pretty simple. It was just trying to figure out, okay, how committed would I be? And obviously, I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't be 100% committed. So, yeah, I'm very excited for it. I think it's a great championship. Obviously looking forward to the oval testing. It's something that still is on the cards and trying to explore that. But to me, it was important not to do like a half thing, but actually go in and do it 100%. And therefore, yeah, ovals are part of that. And I've had good conversations with people around who had good and bad views on it, and I just kind of had to make an average out of that, and decided for myself.
And I'd like to just follow up on that oval factor, because I know a lot of people from the F1 world often kind of mention this perceived danger of IndyCar. Do you kind of have any feelings on that front? Was that something you've kind of weighed up?
Yeah, of course, it's something that I've been thinking about. But on the other hand, I think motorsport in a whole is dangerous. So I don't really see why particularly that one thing should be more dangerous than anything else. Obviously, there's been multiple things, and Jay has been a big part of that in making oval racing or just racing in IndyCar safer. And therefore, we've had multiple conversations about that, and they've all been positive in my ears, and so therefore, yeah, that's why I ultimately took the decision. And I don't think that there's really, I mean, of course, it's not to be taken on the easy shoulder. I don't take it on the easy shoulder. I think that it is crazy speeds. It's super quick. We're obviously racing hard side by side, but I accept the risk for the enjoyment of the racing sake.
And then for Jay, I know you've only been here since earlier this year, but the team's seen a lot of changes in recent years. I know this is your first off-season really leading them, and you've signed Mick, you've extended Louis, there's more high-profile personnel coming on board. So why do you think for the team this year could be different, and this could be the year where they really kind of kick on?
Well, thank you, Arch. If kind of what you just said, right? So there's been a transformation of kind of the entire team. We've got tremendous commitment from the team owners, from Bobby, Mike, and Dave. They've put a lot into this organization, and there's going to be a lot of things that we've, I guess, not announced yet. Obviously, we just did a deal with McLaren on the IMSA side, which was big. This thing with Mick, like you mentioned, Louis, we've brought in probably 10 new people, to the offseason to this point. Obviously, like I mentioned a minute ago, we got over the next month, there's going to be a lot of new things happening with Mick and with Mick's team. So we've already, over the past month, started kind of working quietly on what that could look like. So obviously, with today and yesterday's announcement, we can go full speed ahead. But we're excited about 2026. It's going to look a lot different than it did in 2025. And like Bobby mentioned, it seems like we're in a pretty good spot, from a historical perspective with the team. So just excited to get started.
And what is on the agenda in terms of a testing plan for Mick?
So, well, we're going to we've thought about how to divide it up. So it's probably going to be four oval tests, 2 road courses, and then 1 street course, which would be Sebring. So 3 of those have been already scheduled, and the other ones we're kind of working on now to see how it fits throughout the race calendar too. So it'll probably be 4, 2, and 1.
So one thing I did raise last week was how interesting I think the Rookie of the Year battle will be between Kyle Collette and Dennis Hauger. I think this only makes it really more interesting because Hauger's got 1 year experience on the road to Indy Ladder, racing ovals, etc. Collette's got that extra year's experience, but we kind of probably perceive him to be slightly stronger machinery than Hauger's going to be in, but wasn't as quick in Indy next last year. Then you have Schumacher, who's probably going to be in the best machinery of them all, has the best experience of all 3 drivers, but has the least experience on the American side, where he's got 16 new tracks because of Milwaukee twice. He's got 16 new tracks to learn. He's, as I said, I don't think adaptation is huge, but he's got a lot of over racing to learn. I think obviously the one benefit that Dennis Hauger kind of said is there's a lot of tracks which are new for everybody: Phoenix, Arlington, Markham, etc. So that will help him somewhat, but a lot of those tracks are quite early in the season where he's still adapting to the car, etc. So the Rookie of the Year battle is going to be absolutely fascinating. You've got 3 guys in my eyes who are going to be at a very similar level for very different reasons. So that's going to be a really great story to follow throughout the course of the year. So quick fire, who's your early prediction?
Hauger.
Okay.
Well, who's yours?
I'd probably also go Hauger, to be honest. I think it'd be very close between the 3 of them. But yeah, I think Coyne, every team looks like they're going in the right place. I think Coyne seems like the one with the Andretti Alliance that we've got the most tangible evidence for. And I think Hauger generally is a very, very, very quick driver. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on to the next kind of segment where we answer your questions, and some are related to Mick Schumacher. So we thought, what a great time to answer them. Can expand on our discussions a little bit more with some of the questions you asked.
Yeah, we'll get onto the Robb news once we've done these first few. But I mean, this is going to be fun reading out Reddit usernames because they are quite the spectacle. So Kern2040 asks, what is Mick Schumacher's floor and ceiling as a rookie?
So that's a very interesting question. The ceiling is, I think, very difficult to judge, and there's a couple of reasons for that, because there's no hiding it. A team pretty well for last year. What was their best finish across 3 cars? Probably, 8th or something along those lines. I know Graham had a good run of the IMS road course, so he finished, 6th there?
I think 6th, yeah.
So ultimately, across 3 cars, that's not the standard you're looking for. And obviously, as we said, Schumacher's got a lot of adaptation to do, new circuits, new car. But, Romain Grosjean, for example, took to that very quickly. And Schumacher, as we said, is kind of in a similar boat. The other side of it is that team in the off-season have made a lot of changes, especially on the leadership side. They brought in Barnhart, brought in Gavin Ward, for example. And the structure and the leadership of that team is definitely making huge strides in comparison to what we saw a year ago. But obviously, as we know, that process isn't instant. Ed Carpenter Racing, for example, completely changed their team heading into 2025. And the results are definitely coming. Like we saw by the end of the season, they won a race, for example, but it didn't happen in that first half of the season. So what are you looking for Schumacher? Well, Rahal and Foster finished 19th and 23rd in the standings. Now, I'd expect them to be a little bit more competitive than this year. I think, realistically, top 15 for Schumacher would be a good rookie season in the points. I think top 10 would be a really, really strong rookie season. But I think top 15 in points would be a good target to achieve. I think if he achieves maybe a podium as well, that'd be a good target throughout the course of the year. Floor, would really be outside the leader circle. I think would be the absolute floor, because that's what it is. The field is ultimately very, very competitive, and there will be 3 people who do miss out on the leader circle. We don't know obviously the full grid yet. We expect maybe a Juncos to be in there. You could have a coin in there, for example. But now, it is very, very, very competitive. And RLL were one of the cars to miss out last year. Now, I'm sure that Mick Schumacher will perform better than Devin DiFrancesco. But if he does struggle to adapt, ultimately, outside the leader circle could well be a threat.
Yeah, I think for me, the answer to this is dependent on probably 2 main factors, which is RLL improving on race day, and that very much ovals included in that. And then the second part is Schumacher, simply how fast he adapts to the series, given that he doesn't know any of the tracks. He's never raced on an oval. And I think maybe the test plan that they've got in place should limit that floor from being too low. And as you very, very rightly mentioned, Dan, all of the changes behind the scenes at RLL and some very strong leaders coming into the team as well, that hopefully by the end of the year will start to have an impact. But yes, that is not going to be instantaneous, with this only being Jay Fry's first off season of really leading the team. It's going to take time. I very much agree with you that the ceiling is probably finishing high teens in points. I think top 10 is ambitious. I know Lundgaard finished 8th, but that was in his second season. I think again a podium as well would definitely be the ceiling. I think a race win is probably stretching a bit, but never say never. Looking at top 10 finishes, if you could be in the top 10 in a third of the races, that would be extremely solid. I think the floor. I think you're looking at the floor being struggling in some of the oval races, really, given this is a guy who's never raced on an oval for a team that has really struggled on ovals. And ultimately, as much as he has experience, he's been an F1 driver, he has pedigree, you do have to treat it like any other rookie year, really. You've got to expect inconsistency, you've got to expect mistakes. And unfortunately, with him being a Schumacher and all of the attention, and he's a popular guy, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on anything he does wrong. But I think people can't be too harsh if he does make any missteps like that.
And I think part of that ceiling is definitely achieving Rookie of the Year. As we said, I think it'll be a tight battle, and that's something to definitely aim for. And obviously, the team did win Rookie of the Year with Louis Foster last year. Now, I would argue that class wasn't hugely competitive for Rookie of the Year. I'd imagine this one would be a bit more competitive, but the team have the resources to do so. It's just how much of a step they take forward. And it's hard to judge what Schumacher's potential really is until the first 3 or 4 races, where we see how Foster and Rahal are getting on the comparison to last year, and then you set his expectations against them. And as I said, you kind of expect them to be all in the same sort of ballpark, I'd imagine, given their various different experiences and their reputation. So it would be interesting.
So the next question is from Bean Sidher. I've definitely butchered that, but the question is, what effect on the series will there be in Europe with the addition of Mick Schumacher? And I'll take that one away. I think even in this kind of week since the announcement, and I guess immediately after the announcement, you're already seeing a lot of people who knew him from the F1 side discovering IndyCar. I think RLL have done a very good job at actually interacting with a lot of these people on social media. You've seen them replying to people on TikTok, replying to people on Twitter, what have you. I think that's really good of them. I think that's very good to be kind of welcoming in this new batch of fans that there will inevitably be. Because at the end of the day, Mick has a massive European following. I mean, he's got many millions across his different social media platforms. He's already released a behind-the-scenes video of his IndyCar test on YouTube as well, and I think there's a big market for kind of that sort of YouTube content because IndyCar is so enticing in terms of behind the scenes, and I think the likes of Scott McLaughlin have done that really well in kind of the last season or two. And ultimately, Schumacher's a huge name who is pretty relatable to a younger generation of fans, which is something that IndyCar needs and is missing in terms of its demographic that is growing, but could still grow more as well. And I can see in terms of European intrigue, it probably having a similar effect to that of when Grosjean moved over, because at the end of the day, he's a massive name. And I mean, he may move into the series and you could say he'd immediately even usurp Pato O'Ward as the most well-known driver.
Yeah, it's hard to sort of gauge any impact that it could have in European markets effectively, because we don't really get the viewership figures, so we don't have a great insight necessarily into how it's performing. But if you're speaking about bringing over new fans, you're not really going to get any new fans in the States because of Mick Schumacher, but you definitely will get new fans in Europe because of Mick Schumacher. And as I said earlier, he is still a very, very popular guy. Like, a lot of people know him, and a lot of people still think he deserves better in Formula One. Now, because he's still in single seaters, I think that still garners some interest, especially with the Indianapolis 500 involved. I think in the press conference area we spoke to him last week, there was a lot of German attention in there as well, which I think is a good indication that the local media are interested, because Germany haven't had a full-time IndyCar driver in a very, 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 very long time. So that opens up a new opportunity there. Germany's a pretty big country, a big population. Could his impact, still a very known, well-known name, still very well-known driver, have a big influence on audiences there, and even across the rest of Central Europe? Like France, for example, Grosjean came over, but you already had people like Sebastian Bourdais, Simon Pagenaud, who were synonymous with IndyCar. Whilst you really haven't had a German like that in a while, which I think is an interesting way of gathering more a bigger audience there. And I think again there are still some interest from him. A lot of people did like him in F1 just because of who he was and who his relations are. So I think will absolutely help a European audience, and it will ultimately get more people interested in the series. I'm sure they'll probably start looking at telecasting in Germany or promoting that telecast more in comparison to what it was previously. So I think it'll have a huge impact because he's opening up a whole new audience who maybe didn't necessarily care about IndyCar previously.
And finally, on this, just very briefly, Muffin Forever says, how does the signing affect Louis Foster, if at all? And I mean, kind of to just brush over this, I'd say I don't really see it impacting him on a negative front at all. Like, I think the experience that Schumacher brings and the pedigree compared to Devlin DiFrancesco, for instance, should raise the level of the whole team. You would expect. And I mean, Bobby Rahal said that this is the best lineup they've had since they moved to 3 cars. And yeah, I mean, Foster going into his second year with a season kind of banked and all of the experience there in a team that seems to be improving, I think there's a heck of a lot of promise. So I don't see it having a negative impact. I can see it having a very much positive impact, that sort of experience that he brings.
Ultimately, we saw a positive impact at Aaron McLaren when you have 2 drivers who are competing at a very similar level. And I think Lundgaard really helped O'Ward take that next step, even if we didn't necessarily expect him to do so. And it's the same for Louis Foster and Mick Schumacher. Obviously, Louis Foster will still take a step forward because it's his sophomore season. But just having drivers on his level will absolutely help with that. You've got more data to compare to in regards to the fact that, okay, maybe he's slightly better here than you were. You're still very similar on pace, but he was slightly better in here than you were. Schumacher was slightly better than this you are. How's he doing that? And having somebody at a similar ballpark to you is only going to help with the data side and with the learning side and feeding off each other. And teammates in IndyCar maybe aren't as closely related as they are in the Formula One world. Ultimately, you have your own stands really, which are quite disconnected from each other during the race. But in team debriefs and that sort of thing, that's ultimately going to help. But in the grand scheme of things, you say, I don't think it makes a huge difference to how Louis Foster goes around his business in IndyCar. He's still very focused on himself. He's just going to have hopefully more information and data to support him as a teammate.
And it was actually interesting. Schumacher did talk a little bit on this in the media call that we had, and was essentially saying that actually being in the World Endurance Championship, where he was sharing a car with his teammates, it gave him a newfound appreciation and kind of a new insight into how you can work with teammates. So I think he said he's really going to help carry that over and really, really tap into his teammates. And I like that sort of humility from him, really. He's obviously, as we've said over the last 20 minutes or so, he's got a hell of a lot of pedigree, but he's also going to, it's not going to go to his head, and he's going to, as drivers always like to say, he's going to be a sponge, and he's going to really make sure he learns from his teammates.
We had confirmation earlier on Tuesday that Stingray Robb would be returning to Juncos for 2026 as well, which was one of the two remaining question marks after Schumacher. Now, I think we did say this last week. Robb's Juncos seat was very confusing because he had a multi-year deal, but was it like a Di Francesco multi-year deal where the team had exit clauses, which we've seen at RLL? And Robb's camp in its entirety was saying, no, we're going to be back. Stingray's confirmed, looking forward to going into 2026. But Juncos never, from their end, supported that statement. In VK's announcement, there was no mention of Robb, and they updated their website last week. And next to VK, we had a TBA slot as their second driver, which kind of said, okay, well, Robb certainly isn't confirmed because otherwise he'd be put on that page there. But we did have the confirmation today that Robb would be back. So whatever delay or whatever negotiations were happening are now complete, and Robb will be returning to Juncos for a second year. It'll be the first time that he spends a second year with a team. Obviously went from Dale Coyne to AJ Foyt to Juncos Hollinger, and we will be back there next year. So I'm glad that situation is over, because it sounds like something that could have very easily got very, very messy. And obviously a bit of a new look for Juncos with VK alongside Robb heading 2026. Obviously VK replacing Connor Daly at the team. So box ticked, only one more to go, which will be alongside Dennis Howe at Dale Coyne Racing. But the Juncos mystery of what is or isn't happening is finally resolved.
This was clearly the biggest motorsport news that dropped exactly at 3 o'clock this afternoon UK time, because there was definitely no announcement that Red Bull were rejigging their lineup at exactly the time that JHR decided to announce something that, I do feel like it didn't necessarily really need announcing. It became a bit of a strange situation, and it got to the point where it was going to be announced because, he was revealed to be on a multi-year contract, and you can only imagine there must have been clauses or something that has to be ironed out that he was not kind of just a name checked in the VK release saying that VK had completed their lineup alongside Robb, which ultimately he has done. I think speculation only grew, didn't it, when that emerged last week that his image was not on the team's website. But interesting one. Like, you've got to think there were probably better options based on Robb's first 3 years in the series. I would say been pretty mediocre, but also I think next year will really show how much of that was down to just having no stability really, and having this first year returning to a team, and that stability that brings, I think, is possibly not insignificant. So I am intrigued to see what steps forward he can make. I think it's a shame that this obviously signifies that Connor Daly does officially lose his drive at JHR. I don't think that was ever really doubted, but he made quite a pointed social media post, quite rightly outlining his achievements with the team, which included having their best ever race finish, their best Indy 500 qualifying and race results, a 17-5 head-to-head record versus teammates. So essentially Stingray Robb, as he was pointing out, having raced against him for the majority of last season. I think that's sad from a Daly perspective for someone who served them really well over the last year and a half. But I feel like it's crunch time for Robb next year. Really, there's not really any hiding place now, given that he is returning to a team with that sort of stability.
Ultimately, we all know Robb's financial backing is a big contributor towards this deal, but it gets to a point where you need that performance, like the case of Di Francesco. Sure, he can provide financial support to the team, but ultimately, if you're not getting results, you won't stick around for very long. And we saw glimmers such as the Long Beach race where he'd led 12 laps. He ended up with a ninth place finish, but there's just too many weekends where Robb kind of felt a little bit anonymous, didn't really have a major impact on what was going on. And year to year, I feel like we're not seeing the progress you'd expect of a sophomore than a third-year driver, and ultimately as a fourth-year driver, there's no excuses, as you say now. We really do see a step up from Robb in year 4. He's got a very strong teammate in Rinus VeeKay, obviously had a strong teammate Santino Ferrucci in 2024, so he's got somebody to lean on, who could help with his development. I feel like in the Indy 500, we've seen him last couple of years, seemed like a pretty decent Indy 500 driver. Just needs to take a step up really in year 4, because we haven't really seen much of Robb in the first 3 seasons. Sure, it was a couple of top 10s, and obviously had that really good Indy 500 last year, but nothing to suggest that he's in his third, heading to his 4th season of driving an IndyCar. So just want to see him take that step forward in 2025 because he's a very nice guy. He's obviously been on the show a couple of times, but yeah, just needs to take the next level, comfortably be in the leader circle, take a couple more top 10s, and that's what you're really looking for his 2026.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good character, Stingray. I think it'd be great to see him make that step forward, but yeah, I don't think there's much to suggest at the moment that he was a viable option over, say, Daly, but next year could be key, having that continuity.
Let's get on to some more questions. I don't know how many we've got. Archie's prepared them all, so I guess I'll find out.
I mean, it's as many as we kind of can do in the next half hour or so, really. So I've got them in kind of priority order. But the first one is from Internet Intelligent 8. Follows on quite nicely, given our driver market chat. Says, who will get the remaining coin seat? Which is kind of hard to answer, given we don't really have our own sources. So I guess we'll go from the angle of who fits the billing for the seat and who do we think should get the seat.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a lot of it is still dependent on this Todd Oates saga, which we spoke about last week, where he came into Nashville with this new formed sponsorship with the team, which is going to really bring them forward. They could hire 2 drivers, and that seemed to be with the impression that Rinus VeeKay was returning, which we now know he isn't. The technical alliance for Andretti obviously allowed Dennis Hauger to come into the car, and Dale Coyne was saying that he'll have his lineup confirmed by Halloween. Halloween came along, and then it was Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving has now come along, and we still didn't have a time frame for who's going to be alongside Dennis Hauger. And a lot, as I said, still depends on a Todd Oates sponsorship, because if you don't need sponsorship, well, that opens the doors for people like Ines Lundqvist. That opens doors for people like Connor Daly, who we know don't offer huge amounts of funding, but are still very reputable in the IndyCar world. If you change it to somebody who does provide funding, well, that does change things. Just Jacob A will come back, for example. Just Devin DiFrancesco come into the mix. It completely changes the perspective on whether the team is still funding dependent. There's been suggestions of Yuki Tsunoda. Now, obviously, Tsunoda, basically, well, today, at the same time as Robb's announcement, was confirmed to be dropped from his Red Bull ride, still taking up a reserve role there. So does that take away from any commitments he can do in IndyCar? Is it going to be attendance in the races because it's a reserve driver, much use if he can't be at the majority of the races? Goodness knows.
I mean, the last reporting I read from Racer suggested Grosjean, Lundqvist and Daly in the frame. I think Abel's, it didn't go very well for him, so I don't know whether he is at all still in the picture. I mean, there's been nothing concrete around Tsunoda, in terms of reporting, but certainly intriguing. I think kind of unpicking the options in terms of a driver to support Hauger's development, if that's what they want to do to best supplement him. I mean, I think Grosjean has the most pedigree, but actually by way of IndyCar experience, I think Daly's, he's one of the best around. He's had such a varied experience, obviously, with so many different teams. And also for a team that struggled so much on ovals last year at points, particularly the longer variety, obviously, the Indy 500, both their cars fighting to make the field on bump day. I mean, he's in contention for top 5 oval drivers in the series. So Daly would be a massive addition. I think if you're looking for a long-term play and you want stability, which Dale Coyne Racing have not necessarily had, Rinus Lundqvist is possibly your guy, a young driver who proved himself particularly, I know it was a bit of a streaky year at points with Ganassi in his rookie season, his only season, but I think he proved that he could be a very, very strong IndyCar driver. Because I think realistically, Hauger's probably going to be out after a year, regardless of how it goes, if you're following the Kirkwood model of Andretti. And yeah, I think a lot of it obviously does hinge on funding. What is Todo actually bringing? I don't think there's ever really been that much clarity. I mean, Sonoda would certainly attract more partners, you would imagine. And if there's anything behind anything that people are speculating, I know even Will Buxton tweeted saying that he should make the move. So that would certainly be the most exciting and maybe the most talented of the crop as well. He's been a very solid F1 driver over a 5-year period, and I feel like he could be very strong in the long term in IndyCar as well. And I mean, for the series, obviously, given the popularity from F1 and obviously the Japan factor too, it would be probably the biggest of all if Sonoda was to make that move. Him and Schumacher coming in the same off-season would be pretty seismic. I'd like Abel to get another shot, but it just didn't really feel like a combination that worked last year. So yeah, I've kind of floated around and not given an answer.
Who's your answer?
I think Sonoda's the most exciting, probably the most ambitious, if there is interest from Sonoda's side, because I'd imagine there would be interest from Coyne's side. I think it'd be it'd be an ambitious lineup with two rookies. I think if I was to pick, I would say Daly.
If this hypothetical where Sonoda does come over, the top 4 in the 2020 F2 grid would all be racing in IndyCar, which is incredibly funny, as well as the 7th place Christian Lundgaard. 10th place Luca Giotto did a couple of run-outs for Coyne last year. Marcus Armstrong finished 13th, as he always does. Yuri Vitz was in the championship that year. So Thierry Pourchaire was also in the championship that year. So the endless F2 to IndyCar recycle pot would happen once again. If you're asking for mine, I would like to see Lundqvist in there. Although I think Daly's a valuable addition to the grid, I think he's a good Indy 500 only sort of guy. I would like to see Linus Lundqvist get another shot, because I don't think he got a fair shot, but he ultimately probably deserved his second season. But because of the charters, meant he was kind of handicapped there. So I would like to see Lundqvist get a second shot in IndyCar. I think the Sonoda thing might be a little bit of hot air for the time being, because we yet to see much concrete, and I feel like would Red Bull let him do duties outside of their reserve stuff, because ultimately they're different to other teams where they've got an extra two drivers who might need to be replaced for whatever reason. So in my mind, I don't really see that happening. So I'd go Linus Lundqvist.
I'm going to flip-flop again, and I'm going to change my answers to Lundqvist as well. I think that'd be a really strong lineup. I was thinking more from probably, I mean, it kind of depends, do Andretti have any input in it? Because if they had an input and they wanted someone to support Hauger, you'd almost say, like, let's just split year of Grosjean running the road and street courses and Daly on the ovals. But yeah, actually, I agree with Lundqvist, to be fair. I'd love to see Daly on the grid, but I think Lundqvist deserves that second shot. That's my final answer.
Although I'm a big fan of Daly, like ultimately he has had his chance in IndyCar. It's been in and out of the series for 14 years, and I feel like when he came to Juncos full time, that always kind of spelled a last opportunity for me. And he will be an Indy 500 grid because he's from Indiana and he's very popular in Indiana, and I think that's where he really, really thrives. But whilst Lundqvist wouldn't get that same opportunity, and I think he deserves one in some capacity.
Okay, moving on. Next question from Ronin_18. Which teams do you see improving in 2026 and who will struggle? Let's start with...
Good question. Was it Ronin or whatever it was?
Ronin_18. Or Ronin.
Good question. I like that question.
Let's start with who we see improving.
I mean, the easy answer straight away is Red Bull Lanigan Racing. We won't go into it because we've discussed it earlier, but better team personnel, a better lineup, and I think last year really was sort of the floor of their ability.
Yeah, ditto. Very, very strong lineup. I mean, it's their first off-season with Jay Fry. I mean, feels like he's already kind of had a pretty big impact based off what Louis was telling us already in the season, but off-season is where the work really counts. And yeah, some very high-profile people. I'll throw out a second team, Dale Coyne Racing, with the Andretti relationship, the addition of, Dennis Hauger, who is possibly a prodigious young driver. And yeah, I just think Andretti's support can really help them make that next step. Obviously, they made a massive stride forward with VK last year. And okay, quite a lot might hinge on that second driver, whoever else is at the team. But to be fair, out of all the options, I think they'd all be probably pretty solid, and I feel pretty confident in that lineup. So, yeah, I think super speedways is what Hauger earmarks to us as the big place to improve, and hopefully Andretti can support them there. But I think they are in a good position.
And let's do 3 of each. I think Team Penske is the obvious third because it can't really get worse for them as it did last season. I mean, you wouldn't expect McLaughlin to finish 10th in the standings again. You wouldn't expect Newgarden to finish 12th in the standings again. I think Malukas is going to bring a lot of potential to that team, and I think he'll grab at least a race win across the course of the season. And I just can't see Penske having the same season again as to what they've had last season. They're too good of an organisation, and they've now since cleaned things up since the firings in May last year. And I think that kind of derailed their season as it sort of did in 2024 as well. So I think Penske will absolutely be moving back forward to where we are familiar with Penske being.
I will also throw Ed Carpenter Racing into the hat because I think they've really started to make strides forward at the back end of last year. They become a lot more consistent. And again, with the whole off season to kind of look into the good and the bad with all of the investment that came in last off season, I can see them kicking on even further again. So pretty intrigued there. I will segue to the struggles because I can see Penske both improving and still struggling a bit. Like I can see both being true. I can see them not quite reaching their previous heights still because, I mean, they've had a driver change for the first time in several seasons. They've obviously had more, restabilizing, but also in doing so, like there's going to be a lot to get used to behind the scenes in terms of new people and new positions. And it was a particularly bad season that they've got to rebound from. And I don't think it's going to be completely straightforward. I don't think they're immediately going to be back in their own kind of, they're all kind of omnipotent selves, if you can put it that way. But yes, they'll make a step forward, but I can still see some teething problems for the team throughout the year. But they're not going to have the same bad luck as last year. Otherwise, I don't know what to say.
I will throw in Meyer Shank Racing in there as well. I think that's just because they overachieved last year more than anything else. Penske, some of the Andretti guys, and some other teams, I think, maybe especially Foyt, for example, weren't as competitive as I think we kind of expected them to be last year, whilst Shank were competitive and consistent, but they weren't consistently achieving the top results. But because people were so inconsistent race to race, while Shank were constantly 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, they managed to have those positions in the standings of Rosenqvist and Armstrong where they were comfortably inside the top 10. Now, I don't really expect that to happen again because Penske, as I said, I think will take a step forward. I think Andretti will probably be a little bit better, a little bit more reliable. I mean, Herta was a bit patchy last year. I can't really see the same happening to Power. So I think Shank will take a step down, not necessarily in their performance, but just because other people will get better. And when they're kind of the junior of a sort of technical alliance, you kind of see it difficult for them to proceed loads further. So my Shank Racing is one I'd throw out there.
I'll throw out one last one for the struggle. I'm going to go for JHR. I mean, one thing that really stands out to me, and I know Ed Carpenter Racing, I said they're going to improve, and they don't have one of these, but in this era of alliances, obviously, Coin partnering with Andretti now as well. JHR are one of the teams, the very few teams that still are without one. And the reason I think it's different for ECR is because they've had this influx of funding, whereas for JHR, you still get the sense they're pretty underfunded. That's probably one reason why they needed Stingray Robb still to bring that money to kind of help keep them afloat almost in some ways. So I do worry for them, although I think the caveat to that is look what VK did to a Coin team in a pretty similar position. Like JHR didn't have a great last year. They were better than Coin were in 24, which I guess gives VK an easier job as that team leader. So that's one thing that kind of makes me think that maybe they won't struggle compared to last year, and they maybe will make a step forward. But I think comparative to the field, they may struggle. And obviously, we can't really say much on Prema because it's still not clear what's going to happen to them. But if they do remain afloat, I mean, are they going to improve? Are they in a really troublesome situation? I mean, it's impossible to say. So that's one that we'll have to answer over the course of time. Next question is from Carp D's, Will Pelot's dominance be repeatable, or was it a perfect storm of Penske's issues and absurdly bad luck this year?
I think yes. Maybe not to the same degree, but I still think he won the championship comfortably. And there's a few reasons why I say this. I think the main thing that I circle back to is the ovals, because ultimately Pelot was never that strong of an oval driver until this season, and it finally feels like he's cracked ovals. There's no doubt about it. He's the strongest of road streets by some distance. But what was holding him back, even when he was still winning the championship, was his ability to perform on ovals. Now he feels like a driver who can head into any weekend with the realistic possibility of winning an oval, which 2 years ago you say he didn't have. You wouldn't think in your mind that he'd be one of the favourites to win an oval. Yes, I know maybe he got slightly fortunate in Iowa, but the Indy 500 was no fluke, for example. Milwaukee, he probably should have won. It was just Rasmussen's brilliance which stopped him from winning. Nashville, again, he wasn't that far off winning. He was certainly in the mix, and that's based on pure pace. There's no luck factor involved. I know he had that puncture which brought up the yellow, but I feel he's now so capable on ovals and just so consistent that he just doesn't drop the ball on many occasions. And I agree, Penske will come forward, and I think McLaren will be a threat, and I think Andretti will be a little bit more of a threat. But ultimately, Pelot isn't necessarily in his prime yet. He's 27 still, 28. As Chip Ganassi said at the start of the year, he's only getting better and better. I know there's not many weak points, but even this year, you wouldn't say how can he get much better. He significantly improved his qualifying, and his races became even more dominant. And I know the trend's going to have to plateau, because how much better can he become? But ultimately, I still think he's going to win 5, 6, 7 races in a season, because he is that good, and he can do it on every single track type, which he couldn't do previously. So this domination, I think, is going to occur. I don't think he's going to win 8 races with 14 podiums again, type dominance, but I think he won't be far off that.
I mean, let's be real. The level of dominance that we saw this year is pretty unprecedented. We spent the entire season reeling off statistics of how exclusive a club Pelot was placing himself within. Literally every round we were doing so. And there's been nothing like it in the modern era. And will he repeat that level of dominance? Chances are probably not. But will he still dominant? The chances are probably pretty high of that. So I think the one thing this year is that nobody else was up to his standard. And that's probably a combination of, yes, the likes of Penske underperforming, but also the fact that Pelot is an all-time great. And as we've said so often, he's elevated himself to that status within such a short period of time. And as shown by his improvements on ovals and everything along those lines, he's still becoming more complete, and he's still improving. Chip Ganassi said as much. Alex Pelot himself has said as much. I mean, I don't see how anyone can stop him. No one seems to know quite how to stop him. Like Penske, I think next year, as we've just mentioned, are probably going to be in recovery mode, and ultimately the rest of the field are probably going to have to rely on a lot of misfortune and missteps from Pelot, which just feels pretty unlikely. Like last year, we were talking about how big a step Aaron McLaren made forward, and okay, I know he had a couple of DNFs late on or what have you, but O'Ward was still nearly 200 points behind Pelot as the runner-up in the championship, and we're really going to need the likes of them, Andretti, obviously Penske, as we mentioned, to become much more consistent next year to even come close to putting up a challenge. And yeah, in the last 5 years with Ganassi, the only time Pelot has been stopped was given all the distractions with the whole contract dispute in 22. And yeah, frankly, nobody knows how to stop him. And it's a hard one to figure out in just one off season after such an emphatic season. Next up, this is a question I've had this on my reminders list for probably the best part of 2 or 3 months now. We got it in YouTube comments on, I actually don't know which episode it was, but I've had it noted for ages. It's from Jeff. I don't remember Jeff's surname because I've just noted it down as Jeff. But Jeff on YouTube asked us, how did we get into watching IndyCar? Do you want to take it away or shall I?
Sure. So I've been an F1 fan for a very long time. Probably started watching F1 in 2012. And I was obviously aware of IndyCar. I was aware of the Indy 500, and the first race I remember watching was the 2020 Indianapolis 500. Now, that was on the same day as the Champions League final. And I had both on. I had the Champions League final on my TV and the Indy 500 on my laptop. And I thought, I'll have the Indy 500 on the side. I think the reason why I watched it was because of Alonso must have been racing in that one and trying to complete the Triple Crown. And I was interested in seeing if Alonso could do it. And I found myself being really hooked by IndyCar and not really watching the Champions League. I was like, oh my goodness, this is so fun. I love this. Whilst the Champions League was just on the side playing in the background, completely opposite to what I expected. And I watched that, kind of left it there. And then, funnily enough, as we talked about earlier, I think Romain Grosjean's move to IndyCar for 2021 really brought a flux of interest into European and F1 related markets, where obviously it was the first race since his big crash, and there was a lot of promotion towards IndyCar, especially we're trying to show how accessible it was to a UK audience. You could watch it on Sky Sports F1. And I wasn't necessarily a fan of Grosjean, but I thought, okay, well, this is a convenient time for me. Let's watch it. And I really enjoyed that race. And I've been and the next race I remember was Texas 2021 oval race. This looks awesome. High speed cars, close on the edge racing. This is awesome. And from that point forward, I just started watching every race. And here we are. We've got a podcast, run a website. That's it.
That's it. So you're going to reel off about 50 different things.
I ran out of things.
I mean, my entrance is a bit different because I didn't grow up a motorsport fan. I grew up in a family of football fans. We have a Manchester United season ticket. I've played tennis since I was 4 years old, but motorsport didn't really come into my consciousness until COVID, which I know is when the whole Drive to Survive boom happened. I actually remember a friend of mine saying I should watch Drive to Survive. Probably, I guess it was in 2019 actually, but I never did. I never got around to that. But then during lockdown, I remember just watching streams of kind of just YouTubers competing in F1 like online races. I know they did some of those like organized charity things, and weirdly that got me into watching F1 during COVID, because I mean, as we've discussed this with Will Buxton in the past, that obviously Drive to Survive was a factor, etc. But actually, F1 was one of the very, very few sports still running through COVID. I mean, football, soccer stopped. There was a standstill there, and that was my favorite sport at the time. And obviously, I'm still a massive fan now. And that wasn't happening. But F1 was the sport that did keep going. And I just found myself hooked because, you know, we have Sky Sports. It was on Sky Sports. I think the British Grand Prix at the time was still being shown live on Channel 4. I'm not sure whether it is or not still, but it certainly was at the time. And yeah, watched that. And I think I remember I had to leave halfway through. I think it was the one where Hamilton got his puncture really late in the race when he was leading. But or was it that? Or was it maybe it was the 70th anniversary one that Verstappen won? It was one of the two anyway. And I remember listening to the end of it on the radio. And from there, I just kind of kept following it. I remember going to my cousin's house in Wales and watching again. And Verstappen crashed in on the formation? Maybe it's in the laps to the grid actually in Hungary. Anyway, all of this, I became hooked. And by the end of the season, I was watching every race, which actually didn't include the one where Grosjean went up in flames because United were playing. But I'd literally switched everything off to try and avoid the result there. And then I get a BBC News notification saying an F1 driver's like in hospital or something. I'm like, I'm trying to avoid everything, but it's probably for the better because it was pretty dramatic, I imagine, if anyone watched it live. But yeah, obviously Grosjean became a pretty big story and never raced in F1 again, but very similar to you, Dan, with Sky kind of picking up on that and broadcasting IndyCar in the UK, latching off Grosjean, moving over there. I also decided to check it out. And remember at this point, like I'm only kind of not even a year into my motorsport fandom. So it wasn't like it was something that clicked immediately because I was still kind of growing as a motorsport fan. And as that happened, my interest in IndyCar grew as well. But then within the kind of ensuing seasons, I became increasingly aware of other series, and at the forefront of that was IndyCar. And I think I properly became massively hooked when you asked me, Dan, to do the IndyCar season preview on YouTube ahead of the 2023 season. And that was kind of it. Like, I joined DIVEBOMB in 22 wanting to write a little bit about F1 or whatever niche I could find. And IndyCar ended up being that niche. By the end of 23, we had media accreditation. And here we are 2 seasons into covering IndyCar as accredited media from across in the UK. And yeah, it's been amazing. The next one's from Mike Matt 5150. We might have to have a think about this. I forgot to give you a heads up, and I also didn't have a think about it. If you could create a marketing tagline for IndyCar, what would it be? Let's just give ourselves a minute to come up with something.
Well, is it not now the fastest racing on Earth? That's what it is currently, basically.
Yeah, but let's come up with an alternative. That's the Fox one. So
that's the Fox one. Okay.
I'm thinking of where racing matters most, because I think. Not to have it as a dig at certain of the series, but a lot have become more about the fanfare. And I think that, to be fair, is a big kind of a big measure of how F1, for instance, has grown. But at the same time, the racing feels secondary. Like, let's be frank, especially as these regulations, which were supposed to improve racing, the races have become pretty processional. It's become quite qualifying orientated. Whereas IndyCar, the racing is the biggest appeal still, and the drivers that come over because they like the rawness and the pureness of the racing. So that's where, off the top of my head, I've gone for where racing matters most. So this one is from someone who people may recognize from the Twitter sphere, Hickey93, who is well worth a follow, I must say. And this is quite a convoluted question. We will do our best to answer it in a fairly concise fashion, and also from the bearing in mind that we are not technical people, we are not engineers. We are fans who have not grown up from an engineering perspective, let's put it that way. But Hickey asks, with spec dampers possibly coming, there is almost no creativity in teams. While sponsorship and teams are stable and healthy, they aren't in a position to be pouring too much money into an open development concept, and teams like Penske and Aaron McLaren would destroy them if more spending was allowed anyway. What does IndyCar do to get out of the hole of the spec series label? So, I mean, I've got a few thoughts to kind of start that off. Obviously, as I just said, that we are not technical. We're not from a technical background, so we've got to answer it as well as we can. But, I mean, from my point of view, like, there is a certain kind of allure to it being a spec series. I mean, Mick Schumacher mentioned it after moving over, says that he likes that parity that it gives between drivers. I know IndyCar isn't entirely a spec series, but spec chassis obviously is a pretty big thing. And this allows for it to become more of a meritocracy, and driving prowess actually can count for something. And I think by making the series entirely spec, though, you then don't allow talented engineers to flourish, because they're literally, their task would then be to set the car up and kind of refine it that way. Then you're taking away, as kind of mentioned in the question, some of that creativity. And ultimately most sport kind of centers on an individual driver, but it's also very much a team sport. The team is part of that, and you do risk by bringing in spec dampers, whether that happens or not. I know this was obviously what they were trying in that test on the IMS Oval pretty recently. You just risk kind of taking away from their strengths and reducing the appeal to personnel when, there's points that IndyCar has, teams have been short on sort of high level people, and you want to be really attracting them, and not allowing for any innovation would feel kind of limiting. And obviously at the moment, dampers are the only thing. And I mean, viewing from the hat of us as relatively new fans, I feel like there's a pretty decent balance of competitiveness actually. And yes, okay, Pelot's been dominating, but you're still in a point where any team could feasibly win. And I think there's probably a bit of a balance to strike. I think you can risk going down a line by making too much open for development where you do damage the competition. And, part of the USP of IndyCar is that the driver is or can be the difference. And, if you want a super technical series, you've got F1 where there is more of an imbalance as a result of, all the development that they can do. And IndyCar will never be like that so long as they have a spec chassis. And okay, that will always limit creativity to some degree, but there's not money in the sport for people to be coming and making their own cars anyway, so that's just not going to happen. And yeah, I mean, I'm no engineer. I don't know how you move further away from the spec label. What else you kind of do develop. But I feel like if they try too hard to be like F1 and become really technically focused, you do risk looking maybe inferior and losing the uniqueness of the rawness that people kind of love about IndyCar. So yeah, I think if you did open up more development, you would need something like a cost cap, something along those lines. But a big part of IndyCar is the fact that your likes of Coin and Juncos can compete. So yeah, I don't feel like I've answered the question fully, but that's kind of my opinion on the whole spec series label.
Let's create a funky idea. If they do introduce a spec, sure, but let's say you've got 7 sections of the car or something. Each team can choose to develop one and change one. I feel like that wouldn't work though, because they'll end up finding one which is vastly inferior to others, and everybody would just start changing the same thing. So maybe that wouldn't work. Imagine that one, you can either change the front wing or the front ring or the rear wing or the dampers or the aero kit or whatever it is. It'd be quite a funky idea until I've just realised that everyone will probably find the same thing because they'll find one is terrible for the car in comparison to others. It's a hard balance, as said, because the good thing about IndyCar is Ned Carpenter Racing can win. In Formula One, realistically, an Alpine not very good nowadays, but a Williams isn't realistically going to win in a normal environment. Whilst IndyCar, you do have that. And although you don't want it to become a lottery like Formula E, for example, I find a bit of too much of a lottery sometimes in regards to who wins. You need to want a lottery where you still do have a pecking order in regards to teams, because otherwise all the teams might as well be series ran effectively. But you don't want it to be a case of something with such a hierarchy where some teams are basically turning up with the chances very little reward. And you do want to promote engineering. And I know one thing Zach Brown was trying to promote was like an engineering committee at IndyCar. And could you engage these engineers with the people running IndyCar to help design the new cars forward, where they can use their engineering skills for the future viability of the series? Because there's a lot of talented personnel in there. And could they utilize their resources to all come up with a car that is better for the future and still has some adaptability to it? And if you take the strength from those existing teams to help work on a project, which ultimately is something they're still working on, I think that could be really beneficial use of resources. Yes, they have to focus on their teams as well, but ultimately the cars aren't going to change loads between now and 2028. Whilst in 2028, when this new car does come, how about you? The team's flexibility to sort of prepare this car, and they can all agree as a engineering group, okay, what bits should you be able to change, what bits shouldn't you be able to change?
BatGod629, what do Brits think of Will Buxton as lead commentator? Is he likable, or do they prefer Lee Diffie?
So people who know me will know I'm a big Lee Diffie simp. The difference between Buxton and Diff is Diff has always been a commentator. I mean, I was speaking to Archie a few weeks ago. You'll be able to find clips from the 90s where Diff is commenting on Australian supercars when he's in his early 20s, effectively. And that's always been his role. Whilst for Will Buxton, that isn't always been his role. And we obviously spoke to them a couple of weeks ago. He's been a lot more on the presenting side. And he's had to adapt from initially being a commentator 10, 15 years ago to being a presenter to get into the commentary role. And as he was saying, he was trying to find that balance across the course of the year, where how does he naturally get into a commentary position, whilst Diff, he's been doing it for 30 years in his career. So he doesn't really need to learn that. So by the time Diff came into IndyCar, he was already a seasoned veteran in commentary. He'd been doing this for 20 years and obviously was doing the F1 side for ESPN at the time as well. So naturally, at least straight away from my first impressions, Diff was a commentator who was very strong just because he had so much experience of what he was doing. And I'm sure Will Buxton would be one of the first to agree, Diff is absolutely one of the best commentators out there. I don't think there's obviously a reason why he's been trusted with the highest viewed motorsport in the USA, because he is a fantastic commentator who brings a lot of energy, brings a lot of excitement to the booth, and makes an engaging watch. And you can clearly see on a Will Buxton side, he's got progressively better throughout the year as he's got more comfortable. And we're starting to see his little nuances, and the energy and chemistry in the box has got a lot better through Will as a lead commentator. So, look, I'm a big Diff simp because that's the guy I started watching when I started watching IndyCar. But Will Buxton is definitely a very high quality commentator, and he's only going to go and get better as he gets more familiar returning to that commentary role as opposed to the presenting role.
We said we'd be nice and quick fire and concise, and you've definitely not achieved at that, Dan, but that's a good answer. Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for other Brits. I obviously also loved Diff, and I ultimately just think Will has done I think you just put it perfectly, to be honest. He's done a progressively better job as the season's gone along. I know when we've spoken to him, he said he's been very self-critical, but to be honest, I think even the St. Pete weekend when he stepped in, you couldn't tell he'd been out of the game for like over a decade commentating. He fitted pretty naturally, and he's obviously a massive advocate for IndyCar. So, yeah, I think the only way is up, really. I think he's done a really, really good job, and I don't know why people would think otherwise, to be honest. I think he's been very, very strong. Yeah, moving on. Last couple kind of link into one another. Hitokiri 2. How would an IndyCar race in Britain or the UK be viewed by fans from this side of the pond? Would there be interest, or would it be a waste of time? The bloody well would be interest. Would it be a waste of time? I don't think it would be a waste of time, just because motorsport is so big over here. I think it would. You would imagine it be promoted very well. I think there appears to be a growing fan base of IndyCar fans over here. So I know there's the constant debate about racing internationally in terms of, you know, how viable it is for sponsors, with a lot of US-based sponsors, of course, and there'd be a lot to put it together. But I mean, speaking from our side, obviously there's interest. We would absolutely love that. And I'd like to think, given the motorsport mania over here, even if you go to like a British Touring Cars Championship weekend where it's packed out at Alton Park or what have you, there's such passion that I don't see any world in which it would be a waste of time. I think it would be brilliant.
Ultimately, I do think if you're going to go international, there's destinations that IndyCar should consider before they consider the UK. Like, I think if you're looking at checklists, there's places that should be a priority over the UK. It's progressively growing, but there's not been. I feel we really need a British driver who's sure. We've got Louis Foster and Callum Ilott, but we need a British driver who's succeeding at a very competitive level and winning championships, winning races to really kind of push the number forward in the UK. And it's growing, and I feel like people in the UK are progressively becoming more aware of IndyCar. And I feel like if you did do a race, let's say Brands Hatch, for example, like they did several years ago, people probably would turn up and fill the grandstands. I'd like to think, just because there is a race on which a single-seater race on which would hopefully be accessible and a lot cheaper than maybe a Formula One race for comparison. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time necessarily, but as I said, I think there's other destinations that if I was head of IndyCar, I would prioritise.
It is interesting kind of mentioning that about needing a big British name. I was speaking to someone the other day who is quite high up at the BBC, and he was I just mentioned to him what I do, etc. And when I mentioned IndyCar, he said Dario Franchitti. But that's about as recent a mainstream name as there has been from this country over there, over in IndyCar. So yeah, you're probably banking on someone like Louis Foster to really break in and become a success over the next half decade or so. But yeah, I think, again, I think there's definitely interest. Okay, yeah, maybe you want a race in Brazil, for instance. Obviously, Mexico it's not necessarily international, but that's one that you really target. And I know there's obviously such popularity over in the likes of Australia, but I'd put Britain on a par. I'd put it higher almost than you're ranking it. Maybe that's just from our perspective of being very, very desperate. But yeah, interesting. From Old Red 91. Would an oval race at Rockingham draw more attention than a road course?
Rockingham's closed.
You would have to do quite a bit of work to recover Rockingham. Would it draw more attention? I almost would be inclined to say no, just for the fact that the perception from casual motorsport fans who don't know about IndyCar is that it is just cars driving around in circles and they use it as a stick to beat IndyCar with, which isn't right by any means.
But you have to change that perspective, and do you change it with an oval race?
But would it draw more attention is the question. I don't think it would. I think if you putting IndyCar at Silverstone would draw more attention. Personally.
Do a double header. Saturday you're on the road course, Sunday you're on the oval. Problem solved. Even though it's closed, and you're definitely not doing that at Rockingham.
Yeah, that would double the amount of investment needed to make it happen. But yeah, thank you for everyone's questions. That is all that I have collated. I do apologise if I missed anything, but there was a nice range of stuff there. It's nice to get to interact with everyone.
And if you do have any more questions, put them in the comments. And I'm sure we've still got plenty of time before the new season. So please do submit them, and we'd be more than happy to answer them, because we've probably not got much better to do in the next 3 months. But what I would say is we are making sensational progress. It feels like we haven't quite hit the stage yet of a round of content ideas. And we're not there, but we're slowly creeping towards previewing time, which is kind of start of February. So we've kind of got 2 months to get through. Christmas special will be soon. Whoop, whoop.
We still need to fight. If anyone has any ideas for what you want to see from IndyCar's Christmas special, that's more pressing than any other question at the moment, because we've done 2 years of it and it's quite hard to think of stuff.
What's the St. Pete counter on?
Opening practice for St. Pete commences in 87 days, and as this drops, it will be 86. So, yeah, mad how quickly we're making progress, as we said at the top. We're not on the home stretch by any means, but we are. Yeah, in terms of the IndyCar season, we're in the thick of the really kind of busy stretch of the mid-season. Let's put it that way.
So last week's IndyCar Connections, Archie's just given it a go. How did you find it this week?
It was pretty challenging to start with. I probably couldn't have done it without you giving some clues as to kind of the umbrellas under which the headings fell. But some very clever ones. I enjoyed it. It's good.
So this week's answers, category number 1, driven for Juncos Hollinger Racing, Callum Ilott, Connor Daly, Nolan Siegel, and Santino Ferrucci. Your category 2 was IndyCar Rookie of the Year winners, which is Felix Rosenqvist, Linus Lundqvist, Marcus Armstrong, and Rinus VeeKay. Your third category is won the Daytona 24 Hours, which is Fernando Alonso, Joseph Newgarden, Carl Larson, and Tom Blomqvist. And your final category has a racing brother in Marcus Ericsson, Michael Andretti, Pietro Fittipaldi, and Stefan Wilson.
That was my favourite category. That was good.
Yes. I'll try and do a slightly fancy one each week. So we'll come back to you shortly with the 16 for next week. Once again, it'll be put in the description what the 16 is and the link to play it online. So I think this week's is probably slightly easier than last week, but I'm sure all of you will be the teller of whether that's the case or not. So your 16 for this week are Helio Castroneves, James Davison, Stingray Robb, Benjamin Peterson, Oliver Askew, Kiffin Simpson, Will Power, Marcus Armstrong, Felix Rosenqvist, Connor Daly, Fernando Alonso, Ryan Briscoe, Augustine Canapino, Charlie Kimball, Matthew Brabham, and David Maluka. So once again, I'll attach it in the description, the actual online one to do all your 4 connections this week. So let us know how you get on. And yeah, I think it's slightly easier, as I said. So yeah, see how you get on. But otherwise, that's all for this week. Again, we didn't know what's going on next week. We'll find out. We've got no bonus planned this week as well, so you won't spend your week listening to the podcast. And any questions you do have, as I said, chuck them in the comments and we'll try and respond to them at some point in this off season. But thanks once again for watching. I know it's the off season. We try and bring you stuff weekly, so hopefully you're enjoying it. I know it's a tough times being an IndyCar fan, not much going on, but we appreciate you still tuning in. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.